video is an overview of the full digital fashion design process. We start from creating an avatar, which we animate and send over to Marvelous Designer, where we can design a full set of clothes. We simulate the clothes and export it over to Blender, where we can touch up the materials and create really cool renders. All the assets in this tutorial series can be downloaded for free by clicking the link in the video description that takes you to my website, where you enter your details, click Go to Free Assets and then download. The free assets contains 3D files such as accessories, camera rig, clothes and shaders. You will also access a guide for your blueprints as well as some image textures we used during the process. Let's get going with our digital fashion. Creating an avatar. The first step of fashion design is to have some kind of avatar or mannequin to design the clothes for. In this tutorial we are using DAZ Studio to create a human. DAZ Studio is convenient because it's a free software, but you can also use Human Generator, which is a Blender plugin, or Character Creator, which is a standalone software. If you don't need a realistic human, you can go to Blender's demo file and download human base meshes, or to CG Trader and download a low poly human. You can still create nice animations with mannequins. In the first video of the tutorial series, I will show you how you download and install DAZ Studio with the right package, and then how you install the bridge plugin so you can bring your finished character over to Blender. In DAZ Studio, you can set a human as a base, and then you can more or less adjust every single parameter, and even add some hair. Exporting the avatar to use in Blender. When your character is finished, you can send it to Blender using the DAZ to Blender bridge, but for that to work you have to first select your character. Then you have to input the right Blender version, and if this version doesn't show up in the list, you have to input the file path to your Blender add-on folder. Once in Blender, you have to make sure that the DAZ to Blender add-on is activated. Then you can import your character using the new menu in the sidebar. If the hair is not following when using the bridge add-on, you may have to export it separately as an OBJ file and then import it manually into Blender. Something to notice is that when using the bridge add-on to import a character, the frame range is resetted to 0, so you have to adjust the frame range if you're gonna do an animation. The second part of the tutorial series describes a bit more in depth how you create a human in DAZ Studio and how you export it to Blender. Fix the hair of the character in Blender. If you import your hair as an OBJ file, it will not come into Blender in a good shape. The way you fix the hair is to convert it to curves, add a thickness, and control the radius to get thinner further away from the scalp. Then you can create your own hair shader by plugging a noise texture through a color ramp into a hair BSDF, and then you use the normal as texture coordinates. You can play with the colors in the color ramp to get the result you desire. In the third part of the tutorial series, I will show you a bit more in depth how you can fix the hair. But if you want to take a shortcut, you can download the 3D hairbrush add-on. And that lets you add a hairstyle in a matter of a few button clicks. Add shoes to the avatar. I suggest to add shoes to the avatar before animating it. The reason why we add the shoes before the animation is that we want them to follow the ground nicely. If we pause the video here, you see that the shoe is folding to follow the ground. But if you parent the shoe to the avatar after the animation is done, you pose the risk to have this kind of result where the shoe is going through the ground. So place the shoes on the ground level, where Z is 0. Then move the avatar in Z direction to fit into the shoes. But a character imported from DAZ Studio has locked transformations, so you have to unlock the location before you can move it. Make sure to move everything, including the hair. I created a pair of shoes for another tutorial series, and you can download them for free by following the link in the description. Name your materials carefully. Make sure to carefully name your materials so you know which one goes where, because after animating the character in Mixamo, you will have to reassign the materials in Blender again. Export the character to use in Mixamo. Clean up the scene, check the normals and recalculate if you need. When everything is correctly placed, select both the character and the shoes and export it as an FBX. Limit it to selected objects and object types empty and mesh. In the fourth part of the tutorial series, I go a bit more in depth on how you prepare the avatar for animation and how you export it to Mixamo. Animate the avatar in Mixamo. In Mixamo, go to Animations, upload your character, make sure it's facing towards you like this, and then put the points according to the instructions and let Mixamo auto-rig your character for you. If you want to do the same walking animation as in the tutorial, you can search for the animation Standard Walk and apply it. Download the animated character and import it to Blender. Download the character with the default settings. This will give you an FBX file. Import your character to Blender and check the animation. Remember that DAZ Studio import sets your frame range to 0, so you may have to readjust the end frame. Reassign all materials. The materials of your animated character will have the same names as your original materials, but with a number on the end. Reassign all the materials to the original ones without numbers, both for the avatar and the shoes. Parent the hair to this bone of the animated character. and make sure that the hair is following the character when you play the animation. In part 5 of the tutorial series, we go through the process of animating in Mixamo, exporting to Blender, reassigning the materials and attaching the hair. Create a smooth start of the animation. To avoid breaking the clothes simulation in Marvelous Designer, we want to create a smooth start of the animation. So we move the animation 30 frames forwards, and then we create a smooth transition from the rest pose to the walking cycle. We can only get a limited length of the animation exported from Mixamo. So if we want to make a longer animation, we have to extrapolate it. Blender has automatic extrapolation tools. However, we cannot use those due to the fact that the character is not walking in an even speed, and we also have this smooth animation start. So we have to do a manual extrapolation by copying and pasting the curves. Part 6 of the tutorial series is going through this extrapolation process step by step. Export your animated character as an FBX into Marvelous Designer. Clean your scene and double check the normals, and then your avatar is ready to be exported into Marvelous Designer. Export as an FBX, limit to selected objects, and object types empty and mesh. Then make sure to tick this box to apply the transforms. Make sure to include the animation and then export. In Marvelous you import an FBX, and then you should be able to use the default import settings. In part 7 of the tutorial series, we go through the process of exporting from Blender and importing into Marvelous Designer. Now it's time to design a set of clothes to the avatar, and you can use Marvelous Designer or Clo 3D. It will be more or less the same process. If you haven't used Marvelous Designer or Clo 3D before, I've dedicated part 8 of the tutorial series to get you from zero knowledge to up and running with Marvelous Designer. Here we go through the user interface and all the essential tools you need in order to design a set of clothes. We go through everything from cutting, sewing, stitching, to simulation, to fabrics, UV editing and exports. Design a set of clothes in Marvelous Designer. When you're ready to design your clothes, import your animated avatar into Marvelous Designer or Clo 3D. Check that the scale is correct and that the animation is working. If you want, you can use my free guide to create patterns. You can download it among the other free resources, and the link is in the video description. You import it as a background image, and you have to set the scale to 244 for it to work. Now you can start creating your patterns, and if you want some guidance, I dedicated part 9 of the tutorial series to teach you step by step how you design a full set of clothes. We design a tank top, a pair of jeans, and a jacket, and we assign materials to all the garments. Preparing the textures for export. When the design is finished, we're gonna get ready for simulation and export of the animated clothes. But first we wanna prepare our textures in the UV editor. It's of course possible to put all of the garments into one UV tile, but I recommend to split it by material and categorize it in different UV tiles. This allows us to use UDIMs instead of a single texture in Blender. UDIMs is a way to avoid a huge image texture, and instead split it up to multiple smaller ones that are UV mapped to different parts of the mesh. To get a lighter export file, I recommend to switch the top stitching from OBJ to texture and then bump up the thread thickness a little bit. Then your top stitching will be integrated in the image textures instead of being an integrated part of the mesh. I also recommend to make a separate set of textures where all the garments are completely black and all the top stitching is completely white. That will be useful later if you want to make the stitching more three-dimensional in Blender. Simulate and export the animated clothes. Start and record the simulation. Then the animated clothes are ready for export, and I recommend to export as Point Cache 2 or PC2. In the export settings, weld the objects and then choose a thin mesh. A thick one will not work with a point cache. Choose the image textures you want and then export. What you will get from the export is an OBJ file for your mesh, a PC2 file for your point cache, and then a bunch of textures. Import the animated clothes to Blender. Import wavefront OBJ. Default settings should be fine. Add a mesh cache modifier to the clothes, set the format to PC2, and find the PC2 file. Now the clothes are moving with the avatar. The materials look decent already in the OBJ import, but to achieve realism you will have to import them correctly. There are different approaches to export from Marvelous to Blender. Either you can export a lower resolution mesh and add subdivision and solidify modifier, or you can export a high resolution mesh directly. In my case, the lower resolution mesh gave me a faster playback in the viewport and a better final result. The process of exporting animated clothes from Marvelous Designer over to Blender is gone through more in detail in part 10 of the tutorial series. Import the Marvelous textures properly. Just by importing the textures properly from Marvelous Designer, you can really bump up the realism of your materials. Use Node Wrangler to import your textures with automatic connection to the principled BSDF. Change the setting from single image to UDIM for all image textures. Import your top stitching displacement textures, and you can use them both as a mask for displacement, for normal map, and even to control the color of your top stitching. You can copy this node setup to all material indexes, and the materials will automatically be assigned to the right part of the mesh thanks to the UDIMs. Part 11 of this tutorial series goes through more in detail how you properly import the materials from Marvelous Designer so you can achieve higher levels of realism in Blender. Touch up the shaders. Now is a good time to touch up your shaders in Blender. In part 12 we are doing this original leather shader, which is a mix of smooth leather and grainy leather, and they are blended as a pattern of leaves and flowers. In part 13 we are doing this jean shader with a painted pattern on the back. When you are using mesh cache animations, you need to use the UV as a texture coordinate. Here is an example of when we are using the UVs, and the texture is following the mesh. If you are using generated or objects as texture coordinate input, then the texture will animate while the character is moving. This is due to that the origin is staying while the mesh is moving. If you want your avatar to have a tattoo, you can generate one in Midjourney, mask it and invert the colors. Then you can create a tattoo shader in Blender, and you use the image as a factor to mix between the tattoo shader and the normal skin. Then you just have to position your tattoo. In part 14 I describe this process more in detail. You can download the tattoo texture by following the link in the video description. Add accessories and details. Depending on what type of accessories you want to add, you may need to use different approaches. Items such as earrings and glasses can be parented to one of the bones. For items such as the necklace, which may span over multiple bones, you may have to transfer the weights from the armature. You can also increase the realism by adding some hair particles to the skin. Part 15 of the tutorial series describes more in depth how to add these details and touch up the look of this character. The glasses, the earrings and the necklace can be downloaded for free by following the link in the video description. Before we wrap up this video, let's have a look at how we with simple means can create a very effective render scene. Like the one in the tutorial intro. The geometry of this scene is actually super simple. It's basically two arrays of small planes 4 by 4 meters combined with some scaled up versions of these planes. That's basically all you need in terms of geometry. For the floor you can just find some concrete materials on polyhaven.com and import it with Node Wrangler to connect all the nodes automatically. The more interesting part is this animated texture that is going on the walls in the background. To create this you need an image texture as an input. In my case I used two different ones. It's this logo for the tutorial series and then it's this quote, "Stay creative." The LED effect and the animation is done in Blender inside the shader. The image texture is animated with a driver for the Y location, and the UV coordinates are displaced by a brick texture. That is what is creating this scattered look. The color from the animated logo is multiplied with another brick texture. That is what is creating the LED pattern. By multiplying a distorted Voronoi texture with a noise texture, you can create some scratches and dust on the screens. And to take this from just an emissive plane to something that looks like a semi-transparent screen, you can mix it with a diamond texture. The diamond texture uses dispersion. This means that the light rays shining through the material are separated by color. So by combining glass shaders with different IORs, you can achieve this really cool look and add it to the screen. To create some really cool animated shots, I suggest to use a camera rig. You can download the one that I have created, which is to be found among the other free resources. It has this boom stand like a normal camera rig, but it can also rotate around the avatar and follow the avatar along the path. The rig has an aim and an autofocus, but also a manual focus. You can change the scale of the rotation path and the rest of the rig adapts automatically. In part 16 of the tutorial series, I go through more in depth how you build this render scene, how you create the shader and how the camera rig works. And that concludes the overview of this digital fashion design process. I encourage you to watch the in-depth tutorials. It is 16 videos that will be released one by one during the coming weeks. So subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss when these videos are released. If you have friends who may be interested in digital fashion design, don't forget to share this video. Please leave a like and see you in the tutorial series.